Welcome back, Mistakes listeners. This is Dave speaking on behalf of Todd, and this episode we reviewed the show Ever After High. For sure, a very interesting show. This was recorded, or this episode of ours was recorded on August 17th, 2015, and this would be episode 16. Episode 16. That's awesome. Anyway, sit back and enjoy the show. So, I would have to say that my trip back from Anaheim was a complete success.
Excellent.
Disney was absolutely spectacular as always, lots of fun. But I did actually pull away a little bit of a parenting experience that I kind of wanted to talk about tonight.
All right, fire
Yeah.
away.
So, did I ever tell you how I got into parenting?
I don't think this
So,
is that kind of show.
no, okay. So it took Jolene and I 10 years to actually decide that we were going to have children. So we
Okay.
waited a long time, and there's a lot of insecurity, a lot of like, I'm not sure we want to do this type of discussion that went on for a long time. And one of the discussions that I had with Jolene was I couldn't really put together why I wanted to bring children into this world. And I remember having a very long discussion with my boss at that time who basically said, I asked him the question, why, what is it that is so awesome about being a parent? All I can really see is that it's kind of a selfish decision. And he's like, yeah, of course it's a selfish decision. You're bringing children into the world. You're not going to bring, the idea is that a lot of parents think, I'm going to bring Albert Einstein into the world. I'm going to bring Abraham Lincoln into the world. And that's actually not the case. The case is you're just bringing more mouths in, right? But he said to me, but the best part about bringing children here is that you actually become a better human being. Like you yourself. Sure, it's still kind of self-centered, but the truth is that they begin to reflect your character and you actually begin to mold and change your character. Okay. So jump ahead, let's see, 12 years now actually, 15 years into the future. We are at Disneyland last week. And I can tell you that my perspective from when I was at Disney as, say, an 8th grader or a newly married person has totally changed because of kids. Kids actually make Disney way better. And I can explain it various like this. I can tell you that, say, the Little Mermaid ride had absolutely no interest for me whatsoever. When they put that thing in there, I was like, I'm not going to go to that thing. Teacups, Storybook Land, Casey Jr.'s Railroad Ride, none of those things had any interest to me, right? It's just get to the Matterhorn, start riding as hard as you can. But with them around, it makes Disney amazing. I love taking them on Storybook Land and having that experience with them. I love going on the Mermaid ride and watching their reactions. Every single ride at Disney was enhanced because I was a father. And I thought that is exactly why I got into parenting. Is because your life just becomes so much more full and my cup overflow, right? Or overfloweth. I guess that's the proper term. But yeah, totally. That's the reason I got into this thing. So
Well, I don't think we need to even go on. I think we
I
could just close up
it's
the episode.
I do think it's important that people actually know that we love parenting. That I really had a lot of hard decisions to make, and in the end, I have completely benefited from this amazing decision. And I would say that every aspect of my life is completely enhanced. And that was only made better by going to Disneyland. Disneyland is way better when you have children. There is no doubt about it.
Okay, that's very
That
cool.
is not a dovetail, but what it is it's me saying, I love being a parent. I love doing this podcast because it's all about them and being invested in the things they were interested in. So, we watched Ever After High. Is
We
that
did.
correct? Just jumping in to
Season
tonight's
season
show,
three.
season
Season three.
3. Well,
Episode 1.
tell me about it.
Okay,
You
so
picked this one. You picked this one, and you kind of put a little twist on it this time, right?
Did I put a twist on it?
You did. You said we're going to do something a little bit different this time.
Well, we're going to do something a little different in that, and this is, again, part of our intro, is we usually pick a random episode from a show, knowing that a lot of times parents do just sort of jump in. They get introduced to a show by their kid or recommended by something else, and you don't necessarily get to pick a show right at its beginning so you can get everything. This is a little different in that we are doing episode 1 of a season, and whenever you do an episode 1 of any season of any show, you do at least have a little bit more of an opportunity to catch up, as it were.
I like, do you remember Mr. Fred, Bing Bang Bongo?
Bing Bang Bongo,
right.
That's right.
With the opening episode, you get that introductory paragraph.
You do. So this is a show. It is now on Netflix. It's hard to find all the details on this, but my understanding is that this was sort of some webisodes before, but now Netflix picked it up. This is, again, something, and we'll come back to this probably a number of times as television changes, as cable channels change, that sort of thing. We're seeing more content that is either created and put straight on the web, or now Netflix is getting to the point where they are developing their own original content. Right. So now Netflix has this and it is on Netflix. So if you don't have Netflix, sorry, but we do. This is a show that is... The basic plot of the show is that the main characters are children of your main fairy tale characters. So characters from like the Brothers Grimm type stories.
No, okay, well, let's be really clear. Our central character, our focus character, gonna get the names right. Her name is Applewhite, I believe.
Yes.
So Applewhite is actually the daughter of Snow White.
Yes.
Which is not a Brothers Grimm tale. But they are, what I found interesting was, and a lot of the basis is based on Wonderland as well, as we soon discovered. And that's not Brothers Grimm either. These are just a lot of, like, how should we say this, uncopywritten material fairy tales. Right?
Okay,
like,
but to be fair...
Anybody can go after Snow White and make her daughter.
Okay. To be fair, and we won't get too deep into the minutia, and again, like every other episode we've done, we throw stuff out that we think we know, and sometimes we're wrong.
No.
Some of the stories that we think are attributed to, say, Disney, I believe, were originally Brothers Grimm stories, and Disney just happened to grab them and make them seem like they're theirs. Anyway, the point of it is they are still the children of these well-known fairy tale characters.
Yes.
And the basic premise of the show is that they are, in theory, supposed to follow in their parents' footsteps, which is fine for the characters that are on the quote-unquote good side, but a little more troubling for the ones that are on the more villain side.
Right. So and I'm assuming you're picking some of this up on the wiki page. Right.
Some of it on the wiki page, and again, this is another one of those shows that we've talked about that is over-the-shoulder parenting. My youngest has watched some of the first 2 seasons, so I've picked up bits and pieces of this.
That's actually really helpful to know, because I can tell you. So if she's watched season 1 and 2, is there a little bit more explanation as to what's happened here in season 3?
I believe so.
That was my question coming in tonight. Was like, were you able to follow this thing?
Okay, so jump in. Give me your initial impressions of this.
It's, dare I say, it's kind of a mess.
A little bit.
Getting into it, so obviously they have so in this opening premiere episode of season 3, they actually, you can tell that the writers are just trying to get from A to Z. And they're picking up every thread that they can to try to get from these 2 points, right?
Yes.
It's too much. There's just way too much going on, and on top of that, they're throwing comedy in there. There are so many characters to follow that it's hard to really understand who's core and who is not.
Right.
right? And they want to pay a lot of fan service to everybody there, right? And all of
Yes.
their say personalities, and it ends up being a real kind of a big mess because it seems like they're kind of like covering a lot of what they probably already covered up in the opening two seasons, but now they're actually going in a different direction, and they have to do it within 20 minutes, right? Or was it 22 minutes? 26 minutes.
20, yeah.
So Netflix gives you a little bit more time, which is to the advantage to the writer and the creators of the show. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, they went somewhere, but it's too bad that they really needed an editor, right? Like they could just cut out at least 10 of the characters and they would have been fine.
Okay, but to be fair, and this is again something that affects us as parents, is that because it's a serialized show, but also because it is available on something like a Netflix, you can capture a new group of fans who, even if they watch episode 1 of season 3 and are confused, they can then go back and rewatch seasons 1 and 2 and sort of figure stuff out. Or they can just start at the beginning. So if you've watched seasons 1 and 2, probably this episode makes a lot more sense.
Sure.
But
I would even say, so if we take the Spider-Man 3 analogy, you have these two really tight, well-built Spider-Man 1 and 2, you get to 3, and you kind of want to see where Peter Parker's going, and it's just a big old mess. There's so many different pieces at play that you can't really follow what's happening, and it ends up just being a big old mess. And I feel like, yes, I agree with you. There's a lot of I would say loose ends to kind of tie up, but I felt like there were just more ends that were being exposed.
Okay, but again, think of it from the standpoint of the demographic that they're targeting. Is it about the plot? Is it about the story?
Yes, because if this was Transformers Season 3, which was a big old mess, because they had a movie that you had to watch and then they changed everything in Season 3, they lost me at Transformers Season 3. And
Okay.
I was a diehard Transformers fan.
All right.
Because it
Fair
was
enough.
a big old mess.
What did you like about it?
Okay, so, let me be fair. What did I like about it? Okay, so the one core thing that I pulled away from was, and the character that I liked the most was Raven Queen, right? She was the purple-haired, black-haired girl.
Yes.
I love the fact that obviously her destiny is tied to being rotten.
Right.
And that adds kind of an interesting element or twist to the show. It's sort of like, should I use my powers for good or evil? But again, I think there was some gray there. We can get into that later. But
Right.
I did like that there was a lot of there's some thoughtfulness to the show. There's a little bit of intrigue, you could say. A lot of creativity.
Yes.
A lot of creativity, over the top creativity. I like the fact that there are different realms. There are all sorts of things that they can play with. As far as world building is concerned, as a kid, this is total eye candy. Like, there are so many directions that they could go with the show, and obviously they have. And a lot of forbidden things that you can't do, and right. I actually like the look of the show. I mean, I know that's always cliche for me, but I did like the look of it. It's entertaining to watch.
Well, and I do think the dialogue is clever. You're right. It is kind of over the top. It's busy, but in some ways they sort of poke fun at themselves. Like there's a sort of the dialogue going back and forth between narrators and the characters, and they're sort of critiquing the narrators, and the narrators are critiquing the characters, and then there's this sort of go-between that happens throughout the show.
I get the feeling that's not going to happen throughout this entire season, though. I get the feeling that they had a lot of things to cover, so they had this narrator explaining to you what was happening.
Probably. The other thing that we always sort of take for granted, and something we try to notice, particularly as parents, is that it's still a fairly clean show in terms of the content, in terms of how the characters treat each other. We've seen a number of shows where there's sort of a heaping helping of sarcasm and ripping on each other. There's a little bit of that, but not so bad. And so that's something that, you know, I try not to take for granted, because there are so many shows that are that way, where the characters just spend, you know, 20 plus minutes just sort of verbally slashing each other. And so it's nice not to see that. I agree with you, the plot was a little confusing. I think for me, it's more, my bigger concerns again are always more of sort of the stylized elements, how the characters are drawn, from a standpoint of, like, it's more of a Barbie thing again, you know, perfect outfits, makeup. They're very glamorous characters. They're designed specifically for dolls, which is really what, you know, there's sort of this go-between shows and merchandise and shows and that sort of thing. So when you look at proportions, you look at, you know, face and makeup and jewelry and that sort of thing. It's a lot of perfect characters running around. And so is that the type of visual imagery that you want your kids to see, per se?
Yeah, so with my parenting goggles on, I too observed that, and I thought to myself, this is not, I'm going to guess that these girls are, say, 15 to 16, maybe 17.
They are supposed to be in high school.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
They are very sensual to look at, right? I mean, I can't imagine what parent would want their child to go to school looking like that. Right? I mean, it is crazy over the top makeup, and when they actually get to the location they're trying to get to, they're even more sensualized, right? Their hair is even bigger. Their dresses are a little bit more bigger and more flowing, but I'd say they're more scantily clad as well. And I'm like, wow. I mean, they for sure. Okay, for sure. My daughter's watching this. It's very attractive to her to say, yep, princesses, right? Because it's pulling on that princesses thing. But these girls are over the top, right? Like, it is, I don't want to say, can I say sexy? Can I say that? Right?
Like, I'll stick with sensual, but sure.
Sure, because I feel like that's where I was getting the vibe of, like, what's going on here?
They're trying to create a certain sex appeal to, you know, from these characters.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, again, to try to attract people, but to sort of say this is the desirable female form.
Yes. Correct.
Okay? Tall, slender, heavily made up, big hair, trendy outfits, jewelry, that sort of thing. Dressed to the nines.
Yeah.
And as you said, it was sort of interesting, and it's subtle and yet very clear. One of the key plot points in this particular episode is them going from one land to a different land with magic. And of course, you can't go from one land to another land without an outfit change.
Right.
You couldn't possibly just be wearing the same clothes.
Their
outfits
were already over the top, and I thought, while this transformation was happening, how on earth could they become even more? And they do.
They do.
Right? They're like, this is even more crazy.
Well, they are going to Wonderland, so, you know, they have to. What do you see as, I mean, what's appropriate demographics
here? So let's say we just put aside, I have one more point, and that was, I feel, and this is where it got a little bit weird in following it, but this is the big red flag for me. This is, I don't want to say maybe the mistake, but I felt like a lot of the characters were all a shade of gray. It was very hard to determine for me who was bad and who was good. And when it really came down to, say, Raven having to make a choice, which was to open this portal, it was the good, quote-unquote, good girls that were encouraging the quote-unquote future bad girl to do the wrong thing. And it was the bad girl that was questioning the decision. Like, her destiny is wrapped up in doing the evil queen thing. And yet it's the good girls that were saying, well, we've got we've got to go to this land. We've got to get there. And I'm like, clearly the authority figures throughout the episode are saying, nope, that portal is shut. You cannot go there. We have made a specific rule for you not to go. And the girls, good girls throughout the entire episode are basically saying, no, we got to go. Well, for no other reason than we've just got to get to Wonderland.
But that is a fair reality of life. I mean, I understand what you're getting at. You don't want to just sort of say, okay, everyone is gray, everything is relative, we're all just a mix of stuff. But in reality, it isn't as simple as saying these are good people, these are bad people, they just do good things, they just do bad things. In other words, the perception isn't always the reality. And so I do appreciate that, to sort of say these are intended to be characters that are trying to find their identity, which young people are. And, do they just sort of follow in whatever they're being told to do?
Would Optimus Prime encourage Megatron to do the wrong thing?
Really? That's
the deal. I mean, to me, there's a part. Okay, so what I'm going to say is this is not fire and forget viewing, right?
No, it's not.
You've got to have a discussion. Like, if your girls or boys are going to be watching this show, there's got to be. I mean, you and I are having a great discussion on this show. I agree with you. Yes, life is not just black and white. Okay. But at the same time, watching this alone by yourself as, say, a 6-year-old, there could be some weird ideas going through your mind.
It could be.
Right? Like, I kind of want, at this point, I want my girls to kind of have a good idea of what's right and wrong. And It's clear to me that these girls don't know that.
Well, and that's the thing. Who is the hero of the show? Like,
I don't
who
know.
is the icon?
At this point, I'm not quite sure, right?
Right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if I were to point it out, like if you really forced my hand, I would say that it's Apple White.
Correct.
Right? But she is the one that is pushing Raven Queen to do the wrong thing.
She is, and she is very vanilla. I mean, the Raven Queen character she's much deeper. She's got more, introspection, that sort of thing. And so you appreciate sort of the thought that is going into that, even though she is being cast as the villain, or the potential villain.
Again, I love the destiny part of it. I love the fact that Raven is trying to break that. I don't want to be the evil queen, right? And but obviously her mom wants her to be evil, which is a whole other subplot within that show. But
correct.
Yeah, I do like that. Like I said, a lot of creativity. The show has got an immense amount of possibilities. The other thing I want to state is that it is a Netflix show, and the first thing I noticed right off the bat was there was no rating at the beginning of the show.
Correct.
I didn't see TVG, I didn't see Y14, anything like that. I saw none of that. It's pretty much, hey, it's Netflix. So that gave me a little bit of unrest too, like, or pretty much a lot of the shows, like, I could be watching Daredevil, and there's no rating on that show either, right? So I could be wrong about that, but I didn't see any rating at the beginning of the show, like as you would see on, say, broadcast TV or cable.
Well, you do see on the website that it's TVG.
Okay.
So the Netflix site. Now, again, as you say, but there's a lot of shows that don't have that at the beginning of the episode.
Okay, fair enough. I usually watch for it now because I've been watching it, right?
Well, we are in a little bit of a different world now with cable providers, with providers like Netflix. They're going to sort of follow some of the trends of, and I have to assume that if it's TVG, if there is a rating on there, that they still go through a submission process in order to put that on there. But it is going to be different as we go along.
Yeah. So you asked the question, who do I think this is for? A very mature 6-year-old? I kid you. I would say a teenager.
Okay.
Possibly a little bit older. But I would want to make sure that teenager... Man, there are image issues with this show. And that question of black and white is just kind of got me a little bit flummoxed.
Well, and they do sort of smooth out some of the characters. I mean, the ones that are sort of cast as being potential villains are still very likable, fairly moral, and they all sort of hang out together.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't a lot of sort of deviation between the various characters, at least that we saw, because they're still just kind of hanging out. There's the good girl, the bad girl, and then the girls that are sort of in between.
Yep.
So, all right.
So, can I recommend this show? Would you recommend this show?
I think I'd be okay with it. I again, my daughter watches it. Some of it, again, is always, and this is always a big caveat. It's hard for us to just sort of say this is appropriate for this age group, this is appropriate for a different age group, because there's certain things that we really like, there's certain things we really don't like, and then there's stuff that's kind of in between and depends on your kid. My daughter is 11, but she is pretty mature for an 11-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And the difficult thing, I think, sometimes too, is that I think there's real value in what we're talking about the character development and their destiny and that sort of thing. I'm not sure sometimes whether or not the kids really think that deeply into it, whether we're sort of digging under layers or whether they're just sort of like, hey, it's a bunch of like funny-looking characters running around and they're just going to be silly.
I can tell you for a fact that I know that Starscream wanted to take over Megatron's
Oh,
position.
my goodness.
I'm just telling you. I mean, that was certainly a plot line that I followed, right?
Okay,
Destro wanted to take over Cobra Commander's position. It was
people
obvious.
that are listening for the first time to this podcast, we don't always refer back to Transformers.
No, we don't. But I'm just pulling on some of the
The 80s were a happy time.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying that there were subplots that I totally followed, right?
All right. Any final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't know if I've given it my complete seal of approval. Here's what I would say. As a parent, sit down and watch this show. Sit down, watch it, make an assessment of who your child is watching it. I think that's the best recommendation I can give.
Well, and we can give that recommendation for any show. You should sit down and watch.
Sometimes I think we can watch a show and just say, let your kid watch it. I'd feel fine with Arthur, for example. Right?
Yes, Sesame Street.
Yeah, Sesame Street. I'd say that's fine. Although we haven't reviewed Sesame Street.
We have not. Maybe there's something dark and sinister these days that we're unaware of. All right, you can follow us on Twitter, Parent Mistakes, and on Facebook, Parenting Mistakes. Feel free to leave us comments, good and bad. Tell your friends about us, like our episodes, and give us suggestions for future shows that we should watch and evaluate. And I don't know if there's anything else to say.
That's all there is to say.
All right. Enjoy Ever After High. Or don't.